Piri Henare.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for this opportunity. To inform the House, the Astrolab Reef was originally called by the local iwi Taiti Reef. So when we refer to the Astrolab, we're talking about the Taiti Reef, and I'd like to acknowledge the member Sua William Seal, who mentioned the iwi involvement in that particular incident, and I too would encourage them to make a submission on this particular bill as we support this bill going on to the next stage, to the Select Committee. I would also like to take this opportunity to encourage other iwi who, as we know, the exploration for oil has been turned its focus away from the far north and has now headed down to the area where the Minister, Honourable Hekia Parata, calls home, to the waters of Te Tai Rāwhiti. The permit afforded to that particular company, sir, runs from Te Tauihu o Te Waka, or from the top of the South Island, all the way to Ruatoria up the east coast. And I just want to point that out, sir, because talking about the compensation level rising to allow, if there is, in the case of a tragic environmental disaster, that compensation, of course, the limit has been lifted so that money can be paid out to make sure that we can return as much and as best as we can the pristine environment that was mentioned quite well by the member Julianne Genter, for which New Zealand takes a lot of pride in, the 100% New Zealand pure green image. Sir, I want to now turn my attention to the alcohol and drug provisions within this bill around the testing and the need for plans. Look, I think everybody in the House, every member in the House and in the community will agree that to make sure that these vessels are operating safely, that those who are in charge and working on the vessel are of sound mind and their vision and their judgment aren't impaired by drugs or alcohol. I wonder, sir, if in this bill we could explore probably more definition when requiring a plan around drug and alcohol. For example, recently we talked about the ability for those who are let out or who are on bail to be tested for drug and alcohol, and it was very specific in that particular bill, sir, around the use of psychoactive substances in line with the Psychoactive Substances Act of 2013. And I wonder if we can be a bit more specific with our definition around that, because we all agree that it is important to have a good plan and it is important to make sure that safety is paramount. But I wonder if we can just be a bit more specific there, sir, and I would encourage the submitters that do come to the Select Committee, in front of the Select Committee, of which I'm a proud member, sir, that we hear from the Maritime Union. We also, as I mentioned earlier, hear from environment groups who will take interest in the matters being proposed in this bill, sir. My colleague, Mr. Sua William Seal, also mentioned the need to hear from councils, and it's mentioned in this bill here, the ability for regional councils to keep those infringement notices and the money that's paid to them, also to have a bit more say with the care, with the discharge, if you like, of this particular bill within their regions, and that's an important thing. But for us to truly comprehend that, sir, we need to make sure that those interest groups will submit kōrero or submit to the Select Committee. Sir, who I'm also interested in hearing from is the Shipping Federation. The point has been made many times throughout this debate about the need for a fully integrated freight and transport system. And in light of the recent events, the earthquake and the damage to the infrastructure, mainly road and railway in New Zealand, we wonder why this bill isn't more ambitious in making sure that the infrastructure is there so that we can have a more sound sea freight operation. Sir, because I'm reminded, as I sat in the House recently as the TPP amendment bill went through the House, the government continued to tell us that, well, we can't simply just trade with ourselves, our country would die. Now that is true, sir, but it is important that in the event of natural disasters like we've experienced, that we are still able to connect with each other. Obviously the road network and the rail network is severely disrupted in the South Island and has isolated certain communities. Kaikoura is a classic example. If the infrastructure, or more importantly, the will of this government was there, then perhaps we could have connected better and supplies wouldn't have dried up. There would be a stronger connection with that particular community of Kaikoura who have suffered over the past few days, sir. One of the things I like to do when we read these particular bills is my colleague, Mr. Parker, mentioned the large content focused on the drug and alcohol provisions of this particular bill. But there are, of course, some, as the explanatory note says, sir, miscellaneous amendments. Important to cast our eye over those because we've experienced in the past from this government that they sell you the old dummy. One thing they're saying, we're going to do this, when really you look just a little bit below the surface and you'll find more miscellaneous amendments, ones that perhaps have a far wider impact than those larger chunks of the bill that are being debated, like the drug and alcohol requirements of this particular bill, sir. So we read through some of those, and first of all, in the explanatory note, there are a few grammatical errors in there, but never mind, we'll move on. Some of them, sir, really are about transferring responsibilities shared by a territorial authority, which brings me back to my point. I hope that we can hear from them as the bill progresses through to the Select Committee. And another one, sir, sub-clause 4 inserts new subsection 3A, which provides that a transfer of a responsibility in relation to construction works under section 331 does not transfer ownership of the works. Now, I think that's slightly more important than just a miscellaneous amendment, because too often when disasters happen, such as the Rena, everyone points the finger and nobody knows who to blame. Somebody built this, it's their fault. Somebody was the captain in charge. It was the technology system that Mr. Young says will never fail us and will in fact lead us into the future. It was the technology that failed us on the case of the Rena crashing into Ōtaiti, sir. And those particular parts, I think, are important to make sure that we are able to establish, in the event of an emergency, who is culpable, sir. I just want to conclude, sir, by saying that we do support this bill going to the next stage, to the Select Committee. We will welcome all the submissions that will come to it, and we look forward to making sure that we take the opportunity right now, the opportunity that's being missed by this government, to make sure that this particular bill is robust. This bill is more aspirational than what it is right now, and we can make sure that we do have a maritime transport system that better serves our country. Sir, we commend this bill to the House.